The American Civil War was full of noise. From the rolling thunder of artillery and the rattle of musket fire to the gasped last words of the fallen, the war was characterized by a complex soundscape which tested the limits of hearing and listening. It was a decade too early for these sounds to be recorded by a phonograph, but there was a contemporary technology which took on the task of noting and transmitting sound, the technology of poetry. I am researching the extent to which poetry heard the sounds of war, and how these sounds lived and acted within the poems. One of the poets I work on is Emily Dickinson, who lived and wrote in Amherst, Massachusetts, far from the battlefields. Dickinson had a very acute ear. She once declared to her friend that she could hear the noiseless noise in the orchard, and in her poems she turns her ear to small sounds like the buzz of a fly and the music of crickets in the long grass. But did she listen to the war? In 1862 she wrote this poem, which is untitled, like all her work.
If any sink, assured that this now standing, failed like themselves, and conscious that it rose, grew by the fact and not the understanding how weakness passed, or force arose. Tell that the worst is easy in a moment, dread but the whizzing before the ball. When the ball enters silence, dying annuls the power to kill.
I'm particularly interested in the second stanza of this poem, which places us on a battlefield. Since my work is on sound, I want to focus on the third line, dread but the whizzing before the ball. What is Dickinson asking us to do here? It seems like an aphorism, a wise injunction perhaps to fear dying but not death. But after the dense, overlapping language of the first stanza, that word whizzing stands out in its weird specificity. Where did it come from? One of Dickinson's chief routes of access to the war was the Springfield Republican, a newspaper to which her family subscribed and which she read devotedly. In the descriptions of battles published in the paper, musket balls are often described as whizzing. The Civil War was one of the first in which rifled muskets were common. The grooved barrel of these weapons set the bullets spinning, so they whizzed and whined as they passed through the air. But Dickinson's line seems to be aware of an even more subtle acoustic phenomenon. The most common Civil War rifles fired bullets at about 900 feet per second. The bullets exited the barrel at subsonic speeds. That means the sound of the ball, its whizzing, would reach you before the ball did. In a small piece of ballistic trivia, Dickinson finds a potent metaphor for the confusion of dying and the solid fact of death. Dickinson has faced criticism for being seemingly unengaged in the conflict tearing her country apart. But being able to track down details like this in an apparently innocuous line allows us to argue that even if Dickinson herself had a distant view of the conflict, artifacts of battle became lodged in her poems, making these poems a vital part of the study of the Civil War.